After years of serving in Delta Force, all I wanted was peace and a quiet life with my son. But the HOA president, an arrogant and prejudiced woman, couldn't handle his presence in the neighborhood. First, there were the nasty comments. Then there were the attempts to intimidate us. But that day, she crossed the line. In the middle of the park, in front of everyone, she spat at my son. What didn't she know? I'm not the kind of man who swallows abuse, and she was about to learn that the hard way. After years in war zones, planning secret missions, living under constant pressure, all I wanted was silence. A comfortable home, a decent neighborhood, a safe place where my son could grow up without worries. I found that place. At least that's what I thought at first. A beautiful community, with tree-lined streets, a well-kept park, seemingly normal neighbors. Everything seemed too perfect. And I should have known that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. At first, things went smoothly. I did what I always do. I kept a low profile. I was cordial with the neighbors, but without unnecessary interactions. My son, on the other hand, has always been the ray of sunshine that lights up any room. He was born with a condition that affects his mobility, but this has never stopped him from being the most cheerful and determined child in the world. The problem? Some people don't see it the same way. From the moment we moved in, the president of the HOA, a woman who acts as if she owns the neighborhood, made a point of showing that she didn't like us there. At first, it was just a few sidelong glances. Then there were comments disguised as concern. "Oh, how cute he is. It must be so hard for you to look after him on your own." I imagine it's a challenge to live in a neighborhood like this. The houses here aren't adapted, are they? All said with that honeyed tone, but with the clear intention of making us feel as if we didn't belong there. When I installed a ramp in the garage to make it easier for my son, she almost had a stroke. "It spoils the visual harmony of the neighborhood," she said, frowning as if I had put a pile of garbage in the garden. I've dealt with a lot of bad people in my life. Drug dealers, terrorists, mercenaries, but the worst kind of people are those who pretend to care while doing everything they can to make you feel like an intruder. I ignored it. I spent years training myself not to react impulsively. But the problem with these people is that they never know when to stop. And the HOA didn't stop. Complaints started to appear. Small provocations became real attempts to annoy us. One day, the dumpster was mysteriously dragged away from our house before the truck passed. The other day, they found an anonymous complaint saying that our grass was growing in a disorderly manner. Little things, all designed to wear someone down, irritate them, push them out. But I'm not just anyone, and if she wanted war, she hardly knew what kind of enemy she was poking. I tried to ignore it. I really did. My whole life was based on discipline and control, so dealing with a nosy neighbor and her pathetic attempts to annoy me was almost comical. Almost. But when I realized that it was starting to affect my son, things changed. He noticed that some people in the neighborhood treated him differently. Children who used to play with him began to shy away. Parents, probably influenced by the same narrow-mindedness of the HOA, began to look askance whenever he showed up at the park. It wasn't long before he asked me, "Dad, why do some people seem to dislike me?" You know that moment when you feel your chest tighten, anger bubbling up inside, but you have to keep calm because you're dealing with a child? That's exactly what it was. Some people are idiots, son, but what matters is that you're amazing just the way you are. He smiled. He always smiled. And that was exactly what annoyed that woman the most. The fact that, despite everything, he didn't let it get to him. Until the day came when she crossed the line. It was a quiet afternoon. My son and I were in the neighborhood park. He loved it there. He played as much as he could, laughed out loud, and enjoyed every moment. For him, it was just another fun day. For me, it was an opportunity to observe my surroundings, as I always did. Old habits don't die easily, and that's when she appeared, the way she always did, with firm steps, the posture of someone who thinks she rules the world, and that air of superiority that made me want to laugh. But this time, there was something different about her. The look on her face was pure disgust. I knew shit was coming. She looked at my son playing, and then turned her eyes to me with that typical aggressive tone. I think it would be better if he had a more suitable space to play in. Translation? We don't want him here. Ignore. Take a deep breath. Count to 10. Stay focused on what matters. I picked up my son and took him to another corner of the park, away from that woman. But that's when it happened. The moment we passed her, I felt something hit my arm. At first, I thought it was a splash of something. But when I looked away and saw my son wiping his face, I understood what had happened. She had spat on him. Time stopped. My breathing slowed. My brain processed the situation in seconds. What I felt at that moment was no ordinary anger. It was that kind of silent fury that consumes every cell in your body. The woman froze when she realized what she had done. Apparently, even she couldn't believe she had gone so far. But now, there was no turning back. I turned around slowly, every muscle in my body asking for permission to react. I could feel the adrenaline rising, the same sensation I felt before going into combat. She took a step back. For the first time, she looked afraid, and with good reason. I've been in many situations where a single move defined who got out alive and who didn't make it home. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the feeling of seeing someone spit on my son. It was a different kind of anger. It wasn't the explosive impulse of someone who wants to strike immediately. It was something cold, controlled, sharp as a blade. The woman realized at the same moment that she had crossed a line from which she could no longer return. The smile of superiority disappeared from her face, giving way to something I hadn't seen before: fear. She took a step back. I took one. My son remained motionless beside me, wiping his face without fully understanding the gravity of what had just happened. He still didn't know the rotten side of the world. He hadn't yet learned that some people simply can't stand the existence of anyone who doesn't fit into their limited vision. But he was about to learn. The whole park fell silent. Some people noticed the scene and stopped what they were doing, feeling the tension in the air. I could feel the eyes on me, but none of that mattered. I could have done so many things at that moment. I could have grabbed that woman by the collar and thrown her to the ground. I could have shouted, exploded, demanded an apology, but I didn't, because I've learned that the best way to deal with an enemy is not with brute force, but with intelligence. I lowered my head slightly, looking right into her eyes. "Do you know who I am?" She blinked a few times, her whole body tense. Her arrogance was still trying to keep control of the situation, but the hesitation in her voice gave everything away. I don't know what you're talking about." Slowly, I took my phone out of my pocket and started filming. With my other hand, I pointed at my son. "You just spat on my son." The woman's eyes widened, finally realizing the extent of the shit she'd done. It was an accident," she stammered, looking around for support, but no one came to her defense. I moved the camera a little closer to her face. "I served in Delta Force for years. I've dealt with people who thought they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. And you know what always happens to them?" She swallowed. "They learn." The park was still silent. I could even hear her rapid breathing. She was terrified, but I wasn't going to hit her. I wasn't going to shout. I was going to do something much worse. "You have 30 seconds to get out of my face," I said, finally putting the phone away, "before this gets much, much worse for you." She hesitated, her eyes still searching for a way out. But then she realized there was no escape, and she ran. She simply turned her back and hurried away, tripping over her own feet. But I wasn't finished yet. I really wasn't. I knew it wasn't going to end there. People like her don't learn on the spot. She was going to try to reverse the situation, play the victim, turn everything against me. So I did what any soldier trained to anticipate the enemy would do. I attacked first. That same day, I went straight to City Hall and denounced all the HOA's irregularities. I used the recording I made and attached it to a detailed report of every abuse this woman had committed against me and my son, from the pointless complaints to the attempts to make life difficult for us in the neighborhood. And you know what? The authorities loved it, because, apparently, the HOA was already being investigated for other scams. She didn't know that, of course. For her, it was still just a personal fight. But within a few days, the cards began to fall apart. The first blow came when the town hall itself fined the HOA for numerous irregularities, including misuse of residents' fees. Some secret meetings she organized ended up leaking to the neighborhood, and the residents themselves began to question how that money was being used. Then came the funniest part. The video leaked. Yes, that video of her spitting on my son. And it wasn't me who spread it. Someone in the park recorded the scene from another angle and posted it on the internet. It went viral in a matter of hours. Overnight, the woman became a public monster. The comments were priceless. Who does this to a child? This woman needs help. Jail for this disgusting woman. Residents, who had previously only seen her as an inconvenient leader, now began to really hate her. People who used to support the HOA drifted away. The few friends she had no longer wanted to associate with her. And then, in the midst of this chaos, came the final blow. The HOA itself expelled her. It was beautiful to see. An extraordinary meeting was called, where the majority of members voted to remove her from office and ban her from the organization. She tried to defend herself, tried to cry, tried to say it was all a mistake, but no one believed her. She didn't just lose her position. She lost her reputation. She lost what little power she thought she had. She became a living example of what happens when someone thinks they can do whatever they want without thinking about the consequences. But the most important thing? My son was never again treated like a stranger in that neighborhood. And me? I finally had my peace, and the certainty that some battles, when fought the right way, are won without having to throw a single punch. After the scandal erupted, the woman simply disappeared from the neighborhood. There were no goodbyes, no last attempt to clean up her image, no effort to defend herself. She disappeared as if she had never existed. But the damage had already been done. The HOA, now without leadership, began to crumble from the inside out. The residents, who had previously been passive and just accepted the rules without question, finally began to open their eyes. They discovered that, as well as being a despicable person, the former president was also stealing money from the association. Bank records were leaked, showing that the fees everyone paid religiously were being embezzled. She used the money to pay for trips, expensive dinners, and beauty treatments. While everyone thought the HOA was looking after the community, it was funding its own luxury, and it all started because of a spat. The irony was that the same neighbors who had previously avoided getting involved started to rebel. Posters started appearing in the streets with phrases like, "We want our money back," and "Jail for the thief." The condominium, which once looked like a real estate magazine commercial, became a field of civil war. And then came the final bombshell. With the allegations piling up, the authorities decided to open a formal investigation. And when the government sets its sights on a fraud scheme, things get ugly very quickly. The woman tried to run away from the problem, tried to say it was all an accounting error, but no one bought her story. It wasn't long before she was formally indicted. Fraud, embezzlement, misappropriation of funds. The crimes were piling up like dominoes, falling one after the other. And the icing on the cake? She lost her house. The same neighborhood where she tried to make me feel like an intruder, where she wanted to expel my son, was now a place she could no longer even set foot in. Her house was sold to pay part of the compensation to the residents, and she was last seen leaving with suitcases and an expression of pure defeat. And me? I stayed. Most of the neighbors, now free of the HOA's toxic influence, finally started acting like normal people. They greeted my son, invited him to play, acted as they should have done from the beginning. One day, one of the old HOA members, a gentleman in his 60s, met me in the park and said something that stuck in my mind. "You know it was you who started all this, right?" I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He gave me a guilty smile. "If you hadn't exposed that woman, she'd probably still be here, still controlling everything. You brought her down and ended up freeing the neighborhood too." I didn't say anything, just gave a slight nod, because, deep down, I knew it was true. I didn't need to use force. I didn't need to resort to violence. I just had to let her own arrogance destroy her. And in the end, my son and I got exactly what we wanted from the start. Just peace. And if you also liked this video, don't forget to comment and like it. See you later.